Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking on a deeply somber, but honestly profoundly important topic. We're looking at the history of association football, undeniably the world's most popular sport. But we're not looking at its greatest triumphs today. Instead, we're taking time to memorialize its darkest days, examining those catastrophic moments when the celebration of the beautiful game tragically turned into sights of immense mourning.
It really all boils down to the core thesis you see right here. Historically, football evolved from a localized pastime into this massive global commercial spectacle incredibly quickly. The problem? Well, the sport's massive growth vastly outpaced basic human safety. The physical infrastructure of the stadiums and the security strategies on the ground simply couldn't handle the sheer volume and passion of the fans pouring in.
Over the course of this explainer, we are going to methodically examine 30 major global football tragedies that occurred between 1894 and 2026. Now that is a heavy number. It spans well over a century of history, and it encompasses both devastating stadium crowd crushes and catastrophic aviation accidents that involved entire teams. Grounding ourselves in this number really helps us grasp the immense scale of the loss the global football community has endured, and why understanding these systemic failures is absolutely vital. Let's start with the price of passion, stadiums, and structural lacks. For decades, many of these venues acted as ticking time bombs simply because they weren't engineered to safely hold the crowds they were drawing.
It's really crucial to see how the nature of the danger evolved right alongside the infrastructure itself. Look at 1902 at Ibrox Park. A newly constructed wooden stand actually collapsed after heavy rain, claiming 25 lives. Fast forward to 1946 at Burnden Park, and the problem had shifted to severe overcrowding, causing steel crash barriers to give way. Later, at Ibrox again in 1971, the danger morphed into a chain reaction crush on a massive concrete stairway. And finally, in 1989 at Hillsborough, we see the fatal consequences of overcrowding inside fenced-in concrete terrace pens.
We really need to look closely at that 1989 Hillsborough disaster because it vividly and tragically illustrates how slight, momentary misjudgments in crowd volume control had utterly devastating consequences. To relieve dangerous pressure outside the turnstiles, a match commander made the call to open an exit gate, Gate C. However, the central access tunnel leading straight into the already packed terrace pens was left completely open. That sudden influx of fans into a confined space created a fatal crush. It ultimately resulted in 766 injuries and 97 tragic deaths, with the final victim actually succumbing to complications decades later in 2021.
As the decades progressed, the primary catalysts for disaster actually began to shift. We moved away from sheer architectural failures, like the terrifying 1985 Valley Parade fire that rapidly consumed an ancient wooden stand and killed 56 people. And we moved toward deeply flawed human crowd control. We saw this horribly play out in the 2022 Kanjuruhan Stadium disaster. Here, the analysis really pivots from the physical deterioration of the stadiums to the human element of security mismanagement.
Which brings us to our next theme, fatal crowd dynamics and mismanagement. Sadly, we have to explore how the very measures meant to control crowds frequently became the direct catalyst for mass casualties.
To understand the mechanics of these events, we have to talk about compression asphyxia. This is the grim medical reality of what happens during these crushes. When panicked crowds are forced against unyielding structures, like perimeter fences or locked exit doors, the severe external pressure literally prevents their lungs from expanding. People aren't suffocating from a lack of oxygen in the room. They suffocate because they physically cannot breathe under the crushing weight of the crowd. Understanding this grim reality is absolutely crucial to understanding why locked gates constitute such a massive systemic failure.
And when you look across different continents and decades, a deeply troubling recurring historical pattern emerges. We see the exact same lethal combination over and over. Police deploying tear gas into densely packed, confined spaces where the exits are either narrow, blocked, or just completely locked shut. We see it in Peru in 1964, Ghana in 2001, Indonesia in 2022, and Guinea as recently as 2024. The tear gas induces immediate, blinding panic, and the locked gates literally turn the fleeing crowd into a fatal crush.
That exact pattern brings us to a frankly staggering number, 328. This is the minimum death toll of the 1964 Estadio Nacional disaster in Lima, Peru. Following a disputed referee decision and a pitch invasion, police fired tear gas directly into the packed stands. The terrified fans surged down the exit stairwells, only to find the heavy steel doors locked shut at the bottom. To this day, it remains the deadliest stadium crush in recorded history, caused by this exact, devastating combination of tear gas and unyielding infrastructure.
Now we have to shift our focus to tragedies in the sky aviation disasters. As the sport globalized, international travel became mandatory, which tragically led to transport accidents that wiped out entire athletic squads in the blink of an eye.
Football history is permanently scarred by these era-defining crashes. Back in 1949, the legendary Grande Torino squad, who had literally won 5 consecutive Italian titles, was lost at Superga. In 1958, the Munich air disaster claimed the lives of 8 of Manchester United's famed Busby Babes. And then, in 2016, the Brazilian club Chapecoense was devastated on the way to a major final. The immense and sudden loss of these teams sent absolute shockwaves through the entire global football community.
The systemic causes behind these heartbreaking events are varied, but the tragic reality is that they are almost always preventable. In 1979, the entire Soviet top league club Pakhtakor Tashkent perished due to severe air traffic control negligence that resulted in a mid-air collision. In 1989, the Dutch Surinamese Colorful 11 exhibition team was lost to pilot incompetence in dense fog. And in 1993, the Zambian national team's military aircraft went down when a fatigued pilot mistakenly shut off the only working engine following a fire.
If we look at the details of the 2016 Chapecoense flight, it really emphasizes how easily preventable some of these disasters were. The team's aircraft was traveling to Colombia for the Copa Sudamericana final. Tragically, the plane just ran completely out of fuel. The flight planning was criminally negligent. They entirely omitted the mandatory safety margins required for a flight of that distance. This absolute failure in basic aviation safety claimed the lives of 71 players, staff, and journalists.
When we break down the primary catalysts of 10 major aviation crashes analyzed, a pretty stark reality is revealed. 6 were driven by pilot and navigational error. 3 were due to extreme weather and visibility issues, and 1 by air traffic control negligence. What we should really take away from this is that while bad weather or mechanical fires certainly create dangerous conditions, it is human error, whether it's fatigue, negligence, or disorientation, that so often lethally compounds the situation.
So, where do we go from here? Lessons born from loss. As we conclude, we have to acknowledge that the incredible loss of life over the last century cannot just be historical data. It has to be a catalyst for permanent change.
Let's quickly review the step-by-step systemic failures that have historically turned celebrations into mourning. Step 1. The sport draws unchecked volume and extreme human passion. Step 2. We put that passion into inadequate, aging, or structurally flawed architecture. And Step 3. When tensions inevitably rise, authorities apply deadly security mismanagement, like locked gates and tear gas. When these 3 steps align, catastrophe is almost guaranteed to follow.
But there is a crucial final point we absolutely must address. Yes, following disasters like Hillsborough, top-tier European leagues drastically overhauled their stadium regulations. They eliminated perimeter fences and standing terraces. However, as the research clearly points out, safety discrepancies continue to exist in developing football nations. While regulations have vastly improved in many wealthy areas, the risk to human life remains tragically unbalanced across the globe today, as recent events in Indonesia, El Salvador, and Guinea painfully remind us.
Which leaves us with this final, incredibly thought-provoking question. Have we truly learned the lessons of the last century? Or does the incredible passion and financial drive of the sport still outpace basic human safety? I urge you to consider the true cost of these 30 tragedies as a lasting memorial to the lives lost. Thank you for joining me for this difficult but incredibly important explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.